Hi, my name is Aileen Stoddard, and I have been a second grade teacher for the last 5 years at a Catholic school in San Rafael, California, just outside of San Francisco.
Hi, I'm Galvin. No? I've been a teacher in a K-12 setting, but not in K-2. I'm teaching in higher ed now, but I've learned a lot about teaching in K-2 through this book. I've been teaching in the Philippines in different Jesuit universities for the past few years. So in this short presentation, what we'd like to do is to walk you through some themes that we found as we read the book, hopefully to encourage you to read the book yourselves, or at the very least to help you reflect on your teaching in terms of how inclusive we are in what we do. At certain points in time, we will be showing you some slides for you to read. At certain points in time as well, we will be pausing to allow you to think about some questions and to also share some of your thoughts about some of the questions that we posed. So in the next slide, we will pause for a moment for you to read a quote that we feel captures the essence of what the book is trying to say. Okay, so I hope that you liked the quote and that gave you some sense of what the book is telling us. So in this brief presentation, what we did was to organize it in 4 themes that tries to answer the question, how might we make the K-2 classroom inclusive? So based on our review of the book, there are 4 key themes that we feel emerged. The first is about setting up your classroom community. The second is about engaging students through talk. The third is about creating varied opportunities for reading. And the fourth is giving them a chance to write about what's relevant to them. We'll talk a little bit more about each one in the next few slides and pause occasionally for you to think about what this might mean for your classroom.
So we will begin with the theme of community. And here we have 2 different quotes that we thought kind of portrayed this theme. The authors Soto, Manning, and Martell speak to the importance of building a learning community in the classroom before any of the reading, writing, or talk can even get done. They believe in a classroom community that honors diversity and accentuates the story of each child. So this community should be reflected in the classroom environment, the text, the activities, your teaching strategies, and it should be reflected throughout the classroom. One example the authors give of this is an activity that can be done based on the book by Marie Bradby, in which a little girl continues to ask her mom, "Where are you from?" The mom responds with many memories from her childhood, and this can then give students a mentor text to base and give them an opportunity to share from their own experiences and memories in a way that can help them build a stronger classroom community. The text choice here is very intentional, and throughout this book, the authors offer many different texts that can be used, all of which are intentional to build community, to encourage reading, writing, or talk. This specific book encourages the use of different dialects and language choices, as well as it introduces poetry as a unit of reading or writing. So this is another mentor text that the authors offer as a suggestion to use in the classroom, which can help showcase the funds of knowledge from the families within the class. It offers an opportunity for recipe writing, playing to student interests, and gives an opportunity for students to invite their parents into the classroom, all of which are very student-centered activities through this text. So we invite you now to think a little bit about what your own classroom and how you can foster a sense of community there in the physical spaces, in the classroom library, curriculum and text choices, and even in your own teaching strategies.
So before you move on to the next theme, we invite you once again to pause for a moment to read another quote that we got from the book that we will build on in this next theme that we will introduce. The second theme that Soto, Manning, and Martell touches on is talk. They begin by pointing out that as children are able to say their first words, this is often something we celebrate. But eventually, in a lot of classrooms, talk is actually discouraged. We begin to discourage talk among our students. Common phrases that they mention that we hear from teachers sound like, no talking until your work is done, or stop talking so that you can get to work. So what the authors recommend is to create more opportunities for talk, and to begin by acknowledging that students have a lot to talk about, despite them being kindergarten students, despite them being in school for the first time. And when you think about what they can talk about, this includes their history, their family, their own context, things that they've experienced prior to being in school. So, for example, the picture here is from a project in Martel's classroom called The History of Us, where students took turns bringing family members to share about the day they were born. So as the family members shared about their stories, this also created an opportunity for students to hear different languages and to engage in different languages. In this example, Spanish. So students who were also learning Spanish now had a natural setting to actually use their Spanish to speak with the family members of their classmates. So the mentor text related here is called On the Day You Were Born. If you'd like to listen to a read aloud of the book, you can pause this video and click on the link that we will provide. So here's something to think about. What does talk look like in your classroom? How does it respect and celebrate the diversity of your learners? If you can think of an example that comes to mind, please do share in our online discussion. So even if you're not a K-2 teacher, we invite you to think about these questions because we feel like these questions are relevant even beyond the K-2 setting.
The third theme the authors emphasize in their book is the theme of writing. So we'll pause here to take a look at a few quotes that stood out to us. The authors emphasize the idea of writing diverse words and diverse worlds. One example of this is the rethinking and the reframing of writing workshops to steer away from just fixing mistakes and creating perfect products of writing, to build on strengths of the students, which also builds on the theory of asset-based thinking, which we'll touch on later. The authors encourage students to write about what they know and to write with purpose. That purpose being simply to communicate. So when we take a look at these two sentences here, we can clearly see what the students are writing about, whether they have every word spelled perfectly or punctuated properly, they are still able to communicate. So I'd ask you now to look at the next slide and think about, what do you see in the world around you? This was done by a kindergartner, and they were asked to write about the environment around them while they were taking a walk. So as you can see, they have images of the shops, local places that are familiar to them, which makes it much easier for them to write about. Another mentor text that might be used when writing is the book Brown Bear, which emphasizes pattern and rhythm. The authors suggest co-authoring a book, so using a mentor text and then having students also have some time to do some writing and authoring on their own, with something like this story that they can just mimic the pattern of the writing and use something familiar like their name to help them feel more confident in their writing, and again, to help them build on the strengths that they already have. So in the next slide here, you can see an example of that done.
So our fourth and last theme is about reading, but before we get to it, once again, we'd like to invite you to pause for a moment to read some of the quotes that stood out to us. So as you have read in the quotes, this builds on the previous idea about words and worlds, this time trying to apply it to the skill of reading. So before we begin talking about this fourth theme, we thought we'd share with you a very interesting exercise in the book. We invite you to pause for a few moments to take a look at the drawing and the illustration that we're showing on the slide and the encrypted text. And just to try to decode what you think the words are saying here, despite the words not being written in English or maybe any language that you're familiar with. All right. So I hope that you sort of tried to figure out what the picture is trying to say or what these words are. So according to the book, interestingly, what you might have experienced a few seconds ago is very similar to how young children actually start to read. They begin reading through clues that begin to help them understand the words. And this means that even if learners cannot read words yet, they can actually already read worlds. That's why maybe a picture of a pool here has helped you decode what the words or what the symbols are trying to say. So I think the big idea here that Soto Manning and Martel shares with us or reminds us in the book is that as our students read, they bring some of their experiences from these worlds with them. And so these are things that we can actually utilize to get them to read or to connect to them as we ask them to read in our classrooms. So an example of a mentor text that is related to this is this book called I Can Read. It's a very interesting book. It was written by Donna Bell, and what she wanted to do was precisely to acknowledge that students, despite not being in the classroom yet, are actually exposed to reading symbols, reading texts. So if we expand the meaning of what we recognize as print, then we also acknowledge that the things that the students see around them in their homes are things that they can also already begin to read, despite not being able to read words in English or a particular language. So the big idea here in this theme is really to acknowledge and to recognize that reading can become mirrors of children's own lives and identity. But the invitation is also to allow reading to become windows to other cultures and contexts. So in the book, they actually recommend a lot of different books that open students up to diversity in culture, diversity in perspectives and history. And there's this very interesting website that you might want to check out. It's called diversebooks.org. It was mentioned in the book where you can actually search for books that celebrate diversities, books that recognize diverse histories, diverse contexts. And so in as much as the books are used for literacy to help students literacy skills, these kinds of books also help students begin to empathize with the other learners in the classroom and with a wider community. So here's something to think about. Again, even if you're not a K-2 teacher, this question might be relevant to you. What are the things that you ask students to read? And to what extent are those things that you ask them to read mirrors or windows to cultures, histories, and contexts of their own and of other people within and outside their classroom?
On our final slide here, we would like to emphasize some of the key takeaways for Catholic school leaders, not just from a K-2 perspective, but how this can translate throughout all grade levels. And the first of those key takeaways would be meeting the needs of the standards and of the students. The authors really challenge the notion that this has to be an either or and offer some great suggestions to how you can incorporate both of these things through reading, writing, talk, and building classroom community into all of those.
A second key takeaway for us as we read this book is really about recognizing and celebrating diversity. When we talk about diversity, sometimes there's a tendency to see diversity and focus on the difference, on how different some of our students are, and some of us even physically set them aside because they're different. But one of the things that struck us in the book is the invitation to celebrate this diversity, to see the difference not as a deficit, but as an asset in the classroom, to allow the diversity of our students to be brought into our classroom experiences, and to acknowledge the brilliance of each child. That was a very strong point made in the book. And that really begins with getting to know the students that we're teaching, really finding out their history, really finding out who they are, where they come from, and creating opportunities for them to actually make that part of the classroom experience, of their learning experience.
And as Galvin was just saying, the final takeaway to this would be student-centered learning as always beginning where the students are, meeting them where they are, finding their strengths, their brilliances, and also building connections with their families at home, learning about their history and their context, learning the student's story, really places them at the center of education. This can be done through all of these examples that we gave throughout the presentation. The authors also really emphasize inquiry and play as a great way to encourage students to find their own strengths.
So that's it for our presentation. Thank you very much for listening and engaging with this presentation. We hope that even if you're not a K-2 teacher, you picked up some key ideas here, and this has piqued your interest to maybe read more or read the book even, if you'd like to consider it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.